It's been 5 years since Liberty Media bought Formula One. Since then, the sport's popularity has exploded, and one of the fastest growing audiences is in the USA. However, the last American driver in the sport was Alexander Rossi all the way back in 2015. So who will be the next American driver in Formula One? Let's have a look. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. A system not tailored to American talent. America clearly has a huge amount of motorsport talent, with so many drivers in so many different categories, but few have broken through into Formula One. There are many reasons for this, but perhaps the main one is the fact that the pathway to Formula One is focused primarily on drivers that go through Formula 2 and Formula 3, series which tend to be the goal of drivers that start in European-based single-seater categories. Not only this, but the super license point structure which was introduced in 2015 meant that drivers would have to acquire 40 points or more to be able to enter Formula One. The reasons for this change were sensible, as it ensured that there is a benchmark standard set to make sure that rookie drivers are ready for Formula One and all drivers have earned their place. The structure of how the points are awarded, though, is arguably biased towards FIA-managed events. So for example, the top 3 drivers in Formula 2 get 40 points, the amount needed to qualify for the licence. However, only the driver that wins the IndyCar Championship gets the same amount of points, with second and third getting 30 and 20 points respectively. So the traditional feeder category for Formula 1 is geared up to provide a steady stream of young drivers ready for the sport, whilst one of America's top motorsport categories, which has some brilliant drivers in its ranks, doesn't provide those same opportunities, meaning the pathway is more restricted. The equivalent IndyCar feeder series, the Indy Lights category, only offers 15 super license points for the winner, only slightly more points than the Formula 4 championship winner. So there isn't as much weight offered to those American racing series, and that potentially disadvantages talented American drivers unless they transition into the F3 and F2 series instead. Similarly, there's an argument to say that drivers that do well in IndyCar might not want to even go to Formula One, where they would likely be competing in the midfield or even the lower end of the order until they find their path in the sport. So the system is inherently not set up for American drivers to get into F1. Many ex-Formula 1 drivers head over to IndyCar themselves and are competitive but aren't significantly better, which certainly suggests that the same could work the other way. For me, it's a flaw in the system, and it seems ridiculous that some drivers are disadvantaged if they race in IndyCar with long-term F1 ambitions. And there are drivers that are impacted by this that could be on their way to an F1 seat in the future. But before we take a look at those potential American candidates, I want to ask you to subscribe to Behind the Drive. 70% of you watching haven't yet hit the subscribe button, so if you're enjoying the videos, please do consider subscribing to the channel as well. The American drivers on the right track. Logan Sargeant is an American driver that's in his first full season of Formula 2 after a junior career where he's gone through the traditional pathway for drivers getting into F1. Not only this, but Sargeant is also part of the Williams Driver Academy, and right now he's in one of those all-important top 3 positions in the F2 standings that will give him enough points to qualify for a super license at the end of the season. In fact, with his last 2 seasons in F3, 5th place or better this season should get him to 40 qualifying points over the last 3 seasons. So he's in a position where he could soon be eligible for a super license, and he has impressed in his debut F2 season. This year, he's been on the podium on 4 occasions, with 2 back-to-back feature race wins at Silverstone and the Red Bull Ring. He's showing a lot of potential, and generally speaking, the drivers that are able to perform well in F2 in their first season will also be able to thrive in a Formula 1 environment, although this is not guaranteed by any means. Sargeant is therefore perhaps the most likely candidate for the next American F1 driver. Williams are a team that have one driver in Alex Albon secured for the next couple of years, but the other spot is potentially vacant, with Nicholas Latifi reportedly not in favour for the Grove-based team this year. The path Sargeant is taking is the same as Alexander Rossi and Scott Speed, the 2 American drivers that have most recently graduated into Formula 1. So it seems like he is the best chance at bringing an American driver onto the grid, having gone on a pathway that gives more super license points than the American series. Personally, I think that Williams needs to find a way to bring a new driver into the sport. Their driver academy hasn't produced a driver that's raced in Formula 1 since Jack Aitken, who stepped in to race in George Russell's spot for 1 race in 2020. And based on their current talent roster, Logan Sargeant is definitely in the best position to take that step up. The Williams team would lose out on some significant financial backing from Latifi, but with the cost cap in place and the new funding from Doralton Capital, it feels like the team should be investing in their drivers and maximising their team's performance in order to prove their ambition in the sport, rather than taking money from pay drivers. So Logan Sargeant has the potential to get to F1 sooner rather than later, and he would certainly have a great teammate to learn from in Alex Albon. Colton Herta is another American driver that's in with an outside chance of getting onto the F1 grid in the future. He's a driver with ties to McLaren, a team that has many different teams in different categories, including F1, IndyCar, Extreme E, and they will soon have a Formula E team as well. This means that they have several drivers in their ranks, and the team CEO, Zach Brown, is starting to develop a reputation as someone that offers many young drivers the chance to race in Formula 1, as he seems to have been in talks with so many different drivers and uses the F1 team as a reason to be racing in McLaren Papaya in whatever series the drivers end up in. Herta got his chance to test a McLaren Formula 1 car for the first time earlier this year in Portugal, and it was a sign that he's in the team's mind for a potential transition across to Formula 1 in the future. But given the super license points limitations in IndyCar, Herta's performances over the last 3 seasons wouldn't offer enough super license points to qualify. This is despite the fact that in 2020 he came in 3rd in that series, a result that if he achieved an F2, which is, in theory, an easier category, he'd be eligible for a super license already. In addition, he's the youngest ever IndyCar race winner, so I think it's safe to say that he's a talented driver and could do well on the F1 grid. But given the situation Herta is in, and the fact that there are so many drivers that are in the mix for a McLaren seat in the future, I think it's unlikely that we'll see Herta on the grid in a McLaren car. But right now, he's racing with Andretti in IndyCar, and there's a chance that Andretti could be the next team to join Formula 1, so there might even be a chance for the team to take him across to F1 if they finally get the green light to join the F1 grid, and if they are able to sort Herta's super license. Would an American driver be a good thing for Formula 1? Having an American driver in Formula 1 is often seen as something that would have a positive influence on the sport as a whole. Going into 2023, there will be 3 races based in the USA, and as I mentioned earlier, it's one of the fastest growing markets for Formula 1. Andretti joining the sport would also result in a second American team on the grid, so it would seem logical that that next step would be to have an American driver on the grid as well. Andretti have also claimed that they would be keen to bring more American drivers through F2 and F3 to drive for their team. However, the last 2 American drivers that have competed in the sport, those being Alexander Rossi and Scott Speed, haven't exactly excelled. Rossi's 5 races with Manor in 2015 resulted in a best finish of 12th. And over a season and a half with Toro Rosso in 2006 and 2007, Scott Speed achieved a best finish of 9th position, which at the time didn't offer any points. His 2 years were characterised by poor reliability, mistakes and crashes. Neither of the 2 recent American drivers were exactly exceptional for the reputation of American drivers in Formula 1, and I don't think that just bringing an American driver into the sport is enough. I think they need to thrive. So whoever the next American driver on the F1 grid is has a lot to prove. Many have tried and failed in the past, but also many American drivers have succeeded in the past, and so the next American driver on the grid will have a lot of pressure on their shoulders. They will need to deliver in order to meet the potential expectations of the American F1 fans. I think there's a lot that needs to change within the super license structure to enable more American drivers to be eligible, and the fact that IndyCar drivers lose out is a flaw and a problem. The most likely American driver who could make it to F1 in the next few years is definitely Logan Sargeant. If he's able to maintain these performances to the end of the 2022 season, then I think he will have the potential to progress into Formula 1 and thrive. And if you want to learn more about another rookie driver that's done well this season, watch this video next.